It was one of those quiet, rainy evenings in Vermont where everything feels slower, heavier. The air was cool, damp, and smelled like wet leaves and pine. I hadn't been to that house in over a year, not since Christmas. My father had asked me to stop by and check on a broken pipe in the basement. I figured the place would be empty. I wasn't ready to see her again. But when I opened the door and stepped inside, there she was, Claire, my stepmother, standing, barefoot in the hallway, wrapped in a thin beige sweater, her hair slightly messy, like she hadn't expected anyone. Her eyes locked with mine. She looked just as surprised as I felt. "Logan," she said softly, like the sound of my name caught her off guard. "I didn't think you were coming until next week." "I didn't think anyone was here," I replied, my voice low, guarded. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with years of unspoken things. I had always kept my distance from Claire. She was beautiful, no doubt, but in a quiet, haunting way. The kind of beauty you don't trust. I was 24 now, but back then, when my dad married her, I was only 20 and angry. Angry that he'd moved on so quickly after my mother died. Angry that Claire had stepped into a home still full of grief. But tonight, something was different. The anger wasn't there. Just something else I couldn't explain. She offered me tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured it. I noticed small things, the way her sweater hung off one shoulder, the faint scent of vanilla on her skin, and most of all, the fact that her wedding ring was missing. I didn't ask, not right away. We sat in the living room across from each other, both of us pretending to watch the fire crackling in the fireplace. The lights were dim. The storm outside was steady, almost rhythmic. It felt like time had slowed down inside that house. Didn't feel wrong. It just felt ... close, intimate. I hadn't seen her like this before, not when my dad was around. Back then, she was always put together, polished, perfect, distant. But tonight, she looked undone in the most human way. Tired eyes, bare feet, a silence that spoke louder than words. I wanted to ask her 100 questions, but didn't. Instead, we just stayed like that, sipping tea, not saying much, just being. And somehow that made everything feel more personal than it ever had before. After a while, she leaned back and sighed. "It's been quiet here." "Too quiet," she said. "Does he call?" I asked, not needing to explain who I meant. She looked at me, a slow breath escaping her lips. "Sometimes, when he remembers." That was the first real moment, the first crack in the wall between us. And I realized then that Claire wasn't the woman I'd painted in my mind all these years. She wasn't cold. She was just ... lonely. Forgotten. Like me. The firelight danced across her face. She looked softer in the glow. Her eyes held something deep and fragile. And as we sat there, two people who were supposed to be nothing more, then family by name, I started to feel something I couldn't name. A pull, a spark. The beginning of something neither of us saw coming. We were alone in the house. And silence had never felt so loud. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and the quiet creak of floorboards upstairs. The house was still dim, the clouds hiding the sun, and everything felt like it was holding its breath. I hadn't planned on staying the night, but the storm made it impossible to leave. And somewhere deep inside, maybe I didn't really want to go. Claire was in the kitchen, her back to me, wearing a simple gray t-shirt that clung to her body. In the softest way, her hair tied loosely, as if she hadn't slept much either. When she turned around and saw me, she smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low and calm, like nothing about last night had changed anything. But something had. We both felt it. That unspoken energy still hung between us, quiet but undeniable. We sat at the table like two people who knew each other's names, or were only just starting to see one another for the first time. Claire was 38, almost 15 years older than me, but age was the last thing I noticed about her. She had this softness, this quiet sadness that drew me in. I remembered the first time I saw her at my dad's wedding. She looked flawless, then perfect dress, perfect smile, but something about her eyes, even back then, told a different story. I'd always assumed she was cold, too polished, too put together. But now, sitting across from her in this quiet house, I saw something else entirely, someone real. Someone hurting? We talked for a while about small things, whether the town, my job back in Boston, but the conversation kept circling around something deeper. Eventually, I asked her the question I'd been holding back. I noticed you weren't wearing your ring, I said, careful, watching her face. She paused, her eyes dropping to her coffee cup. I took it off a few weeks ago, she said finally. It didn't feel right anymore. Like I was pretending to be married to a man who isn't even here. Her words hit hard. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because I understood that feeling of being in a place that looks like home but doesn't feel like it. Of playing a role just to keep things from falling apart. My dad? Is he really gone that much? I asked. She nodded slowly. Lately, it's like I don't exist. He's always working, always traveling. And when he's here, he's somewhere else. She didn't cry, but she didn't need to. Her voice cracked just enough to show the weight of what she carried. I reached for her hand almost without thinking. It was a gentle touch, barely there, but she didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long moment, connected by something we couldn't name. Not lust, not yet, but understanding. A closeness that felt both dangerous and comforting. Later, we ended up in the living room again, wrapped in blankets, talking like old friends who'd lost time. She laughed at something I said, really laughed. And in that moment, I saw the woman she used to be. The woman no one had cared to see in years. The tension between us had changed. It was no longer awkward. It was warm, charged. I felt it every time our knees brushed. Every time her eyes lingered a second too long. It wasn't just attraction, it was need. It was two people quietly slipping into something they weren't supposed to feel but couldn't stop from happening. And in that quiet house, surrounded by silence and the scent of cinnamon tea. The first real crack in the wall between us had formed. Asterisk, by late afternoon, the house had gone quiet again. That kind of stillness where every sound feels louder than it should. Every breath, every step, every heartbeat. I found Claire standing in the kitchen by the window, staring outside like she was waiting for something. Or maybe for someone who wasn't coming back. She didn't hear me at first, but when she turned around, her face gave it all away. Her lips pressed tight, like she was trying to keep from falling apart. I asked if she was okay. She nodded, then shook her head. And finally she whispered, "No, I'm not." She didn't try to hide it anymore. The tears came quietly, sliding down her face without apology. I stood there, unsure if I should give her space or hold her. But when I stepped closer, she leaned into me like her body had been waiting to be touched, waiting to be seen. She didn't need to explain everything. I think, deep down, I already knew. But she said it anyway, in that soft, trembling voice. "Your father, he's been seeing someone else. In Montreal." For over 6 months, her words hit me like cold water. My hands clenched without thinking. I didn't know what to say. She showed me the texts, the hotel receipts, the credit, card charges for jewelry she never received. It was all there, the proof. My dad, the man I'd looked up to, the man who married this woman and brought her into our lives, had been living a lie. And suddenly, all that distance between Claire and me, all that tension, it made sense. She wasn't just lonely. She was betrayed. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make things worse," she said. "You already had your reasons not to like me." I looked at her really, looked at her hand, realized something painful. I never gave her a chance. I had blamed her for stepping into Mom's place, when the truth was, She had been standing in a space that was never truly hers to begin with. And still, she stayed. For years. For a man who didn't even stay faithful. That night, after dinner and too much red wine, the atmosphere shifted again. There was a softness between us now. We weren't just stepmother and stepson. We were two. People who'd been wronged, who'd both been carrying the weight of someone else's choices. And we were finally starting to set it down. She laughed at something I said, one of those easy, unguarded laughs that make you forget the rest of the world for a second. And then she leaned her head against my shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Her fingers brushed mine, slowly, deliberately. And when our hands intertwined, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Everything was in that silence. That quiet understanding between two people who had both lost something but somehow found this small, strange comfort in each other. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows slightly. Inside, the only sound was the fire crackling, the soft clink of her wine glass as she set it down, and the slow, steady rhythm of our hearts finally beating in sync. That night, something began that neither of us planned. And neither of us could stop. The night felt different, thicker somehow, like the air itself was waiting. The storm had passed, but the world outside was still soaked and silent. Inside, the house was dim, lit only by the soft orange glow of candles and the fireplace crackling low in the corner. We didn't speak much. There was no need. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It had become something intimate. Something that wrapped around us like a secret. Claire sat beside me on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, her sweater slipping slightly off one shoulder. I could feel her warmth next to me. The space between us had grown smaller all day, shrinking with every glance, every shared look. Every breath held too long. She poured us each another glass of wine, her fingers brushing mine as she handed it over. Her touch lingered just enough to feel electric. I watched the way the firelight danced across her face, highlighting the curves of her lips. The soft lines under her eyes, the sadness and the strength both living in the same place. She looked over at me, then away again, her lips parting, as if to speak, but no words came. It was her voice that finally broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if we met under different circumstances? She asked, her tone gentle, careful, almost afraid of the answer. I turned to her, not saying a word at first, 'cause I had wondered. More times than I was willing to admit. And I could see in her eyes that she had to. The attraction between us wasn't sudden, it had been building in quiet moments. In stolen glances, in the way we understood each other without needing to explain. This wasn't lust born in a single night. This was a connection that had been quietly growing beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it would no longer be denied. She leaned in slowly, her breath warm, her eyes locked with mine. I could smell the red wine on her lips, mixed with the faint vanilla of her skin. And then, without asking, without warning, she kissed me. Soft at first, like she was testing the edge of something forbidden, but it deepened quickly. Our hands found each other, our bodies leaning into. The heat, every touch felt more real than anything I'd felt in years. It was tenderness wrapped in hunger, comfort laced with fire. There was no guilt, not in that moment, only relief. Like we were finally giving in to something we had both been fighting too long. She pulled away first, her breath shaky, her eyes full of emotion. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered, but I didn't let go. I held her face in my hands, my thumb brushing the side of her cheek. Claire, I said quietly, you're not alone anymore. She closed her eyes, letting those words settle inside her like a truth she'd needed to hear for years. And in that moment, we weren't thinking about titles or rules or what would come next. We're just two people, broken in different ways, finding something soft and real in each other. Something we didn't ask for but needed all the same outside. The night held its breath. Inside, the silence had finally broken. Asterisk, the next morning felt unreal. Like waking up in a dream you weren't ready to leave. The light poured in through the kitchen window, soft and golden, warming everything it touched, including the quiet space between Claire and me. She stood at the stove wearing one of my old college hoodies she'd pulled from the laundry room way. Too big on her, sleeves past her hands, but somehow she made it look like it belonged to her. I watched her from the hallway, wondering when things had shifted so far, and if it was even possible to go back. We didn't talk much about the night before, not yet. But it was written in every glance, every brush of her hand as she passed. Me, my coffee, every moment of silence that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was as if we had both opened a door that couldn't be closed. There was no going back to what we were before. We had crossed that invisible line, the one you're not supposed to even think about, Tan suddenly. It felt like we had been standing too close to it for far too long. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, her bare legs tucked under her, her fingers lightly circling the rim of her mug. I wanted to ask her if she regretted it, but part of me was afraid of the answer. Instead, I said something simple. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, then looked up at me, her eyes soft but serious. "I don't feel guilty," she whispered. "I probably should, but I don't." I felt something shift in my chest, something tight loosening. "Me neither," I said. And just like that, we weren't pretending anymore. The masks we'd worn for years, hers as the forgotten wife, mine as the distant son, they were gone now. Left somewhere in the space between the fireplace and the long conversation that changed everything. That afternoon we walked through the backyard trails behind the house, the same ones I used to wander as a kid. Everything looked different, now quieter, more alive somehow. She told me things she'd never said out loud before about how alone she'd felt in the marriage. How my father hadn't touched her in over a year. How she used to cry in the shower so no one would hear. I told her things too about the anger I'd carried, the guilt for blaming her, the years I wasted building walls around myself. There were no more lies between us, only truths that had been buried under years of silence. Later, we lay on the living room floor again, the rug beneath us scratchy and familiar, the fire low and steady. She curled into my side like it was the most natural thing in the world. We kissed again, slower this time, less desperate, more knowing. Her fingers trailed down my chest, and mine traced the curve of her waist. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, deep, something honest and raw. We weren't trying to fill a void. We were finally feeling something real. And even though we didn't talk about what it meant or where it was going, we both knew. This wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point, a choice. One we had made without saying it out loud. The lines we crossed weren't just physical, they were emotional, moral, and irreversible. But in that quiet space between what's right and what's real, we found each other. And neither of us wanted to let go. Asterisk, 2 days passed, and we stayed in that house like time had paused just for us. We moved through it together like shadows dancing close, never straying far, caught in that strange space between comfort and desire, pain and passion. Claire and I no longer needed to explain what was happening. We were simply living it, feeling it. The touch of her hand on my chest in the middle of the night, the way I kissed her shoulder as she stirred in bed. The way we breathed in sync all felt real and dangerous and impossible to stop. But deep down, we both knew it couldn't last forever. Reality doesn't wait outside the door forever. Kicks it in when you least expect it. And that moment came on the third morning, when my father called. I was sitting at the kitchen table, Claire upstairs in the shower, when his name lit up my screen. I froze. For a second, I wanted to ignore it, to pretend he didn't exist. But I answered. His voice was casual, tired, as if nothing had changed. Said he was flying in from Montreal that evening. "Can't wait to see you both," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I just agreed. And then, just like that, the fantasy shattered. Claire came downstairs, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp, her face fresh and peaceful. But when I told her, the color drained from her face. She sat down slowly, like her knees might give out. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "It's soft, broken. What happens now?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell her I'd stay, that we'd run away together, that none of this had to end. But the truth was messier than that. My father was still her husband. I was still his son. And what we'd done, no matter how real it felt, would tear everything apart if it ever came to light. That night she made dinner, but neither of us ate much. We sat in silence, our fingers barely touching under the table, both pretending we could hold on to something already slipping through our hands. At 9:43 p.m., we heard the car pull into the driveway. His car. Claire stood up, her eyes glassy. She walked over to me, pressed her lips against mine one last time, slow, trembling, full of everything we couldn't say out loud. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, "I want you to know, this was real." And then she walked to the door, fixed her hair, and became someone else again, the wife, the host, the woman who'd been waiting for her husband. My dad walked in like nothing had changed. He hugged her. Then he hugged me. He poured a drink, told stories about Montreal, laughed like he hadn't betrayed the very house he walked into. Claire smiled. She nodded. She played the role perfectly. And I just sat there, watching her, wondering how long she could carry the weight of this secret hand, how long I could look at him without breaking. Eventually, I left, told him I had to get back to Boston. He hugged me again, said he was proud of me. Claire didn't follow me out. But when I started the car, I saw her through the upstairs window. She was standing there, her hand pressed to the glass, eyes locked on mine. No words, just silence. And in that moment, I knew we would never be the same again. We had crossed a line, and now we lived on opposite sides of it. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how much time passed, a part of me would always remember that one weekend, when we were alone in the house and everything changed.